Hey, FTM Transdesk viewers. It is Saturday. I'm Zach, and this week we are talking about a military draft. I'm in the US, so I think the way it works here is that if you're trans, once you change your gender marker, you have to register for the draft. Um, but since you're trans, you're medically ineligible, so it doesn't really matter. But I guess legally you have to register for it anyways, even though we currently don't have an active draft. So that's pretty much all I have to say about the draft. Trans issues related. I don't know. I personally have not changed my gender marker yet. I don't know if I ever will for legal and political purposes. But regardless, that's the trans side of it. On the regular everyday not trans side of things, I should start off by saying that I'm incredibly anti-military, especially the U.S. military. It has become sort of a world police force rather than what militaries were originally intended to do, which was to protect and defend um, a country rather than be used as a tool to further the political interests of the government and parties in power, which is pretty much what it does now. There's very little that our military does that I think is in the original intent of having armed forces. I don't think we should have been in Afghanistan. I don't think we should have gone to Iraq. We definitely shouldn't have gone to Iraq. Um, we shouldn't have been in Vietnam, etc., etc., etc. It's not our job to police the world and continue imperialist policies that have driven the foreign policy of this country since the 19th century, really, at least outright. Because the military is still a force that is used to conquer and colonize, regardless of how it's portrayed as such, both by the government, by the media, and how people actually view the military. It sets out to conquer nations, regardless of our actual intent. We didn't go to Iraq to liberate people. We went to colonize in our own interests, essentially, and put up government in the guise of democracy and freedom. Same with Afghanistan. In the time since those governments have been put in place, there's been rampant corruption and all sorts of ridiculous nonsense that doesn't make anything any better or worse than it was before we went over there. So I have to say, though, that since we are a country that does have a large, very large, active military force, and that we do have a draft, although it is currently inactive, if we have to have a military and we have to have some sort of national fighting force of some sort, I am far more for a draft than I am for an all-volunteer force, because an all-volunteer force is pretty much comprised of people that have very few other options. Those that make up the Army, the Marines, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, etc., etc. Many people volunteer to go into the service because they need the money, because they can't afford college, because their families need the money, because they can't logistically, physically afford to stay in their own homes anymore. They can't afford to live on their own, but they can't continue to be a burden to their parents. They can't get another job. You know, the military actively recruits those that are poor, that are people of color, that live below the poverty line, because they know that there are very few other options for them. And so what it becomes is, you keep a class of working poor, of people of color who don't have any means, who live in areas where there is very little opportunity for growth, that keep perpetuating racial inequalities that do not allow people from those communities to really advance, through poor schooling, through lack of jobs, through whatever else. So then they have a consistent stream of people from those communities and from those sorts of backgrounds that go into the military because they don't have another choice. I have nothing against people that join the armed services. That's their decision to make. I have family members that serve, and that's their choice to make. But it becomes problematic when it isn't a choice anymore for some people, and for a good portion. It's not a matter of they wanted to serve their country, it's a matter of they needed the money, or they didn't have another place to go. And that's, what they had to do in order to survive. And I don't think any sort of, service like that should be based on people having needs. And the only way to meet those needs is to go off and fight in wars or serving in areas, and going off to fight wars that they don't believe in, that we shouldn't have been fighting in the first place. When there is an active draft, it's not a perfect system by any means, but it does level the playing field a bit more, in that every male over between the ages of 18 and 26 or something like that, I don't know, is eligible, and they all have an equal chance of being pulled and having to serve. In theory, in a perfect world, that's how it works, but I'm sure there are ways to get around it. But regardless, there's a much more equal distribution of, what's the word I want to use? It's far more equal in how people are selected in order to serve. It's not those that are just have no other options. It's people from all economic classes, all racial backgrounds, all education backgrounds, blah, 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 etc. Yeah, if there has to be military service in this country, I would much rather have it be through a draft system rather than an all-volunteer force, which is disproportionately comprised of poor people of color and people of little means with little room for advancement in their civilian lives. Instead of having a giant defense budget, more resources should be put towards social programs, towards aid for needy families, towards welfare, food stamps, towards job programs, towards after-school programs for kids, towards education, towards all of these things, so that people in disenfranchised neighborhoods have a better chance of, getting to an equal playing field with those of us who have been given more opportunities, either due to the schools we went to, the communities we live in, our race, our economic class, anything like that. So yeah, that's how I feel about the draft and about the military. I hope everyone is doing well, and I will be back next week. Bye.